Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Coolangatta room for the first of the afternoon sessions. Just before we kick off, if you get on the app, you can actually ask questions in there. If we have time for that, we'll go for questions at the end. But for now, I'd like to introduce Nick Clark from Zscaler. Is it Zscaler or Zscaler?
Well, there's no right or wrong answer. You do you.
Well, Nick is the principal sales engineer for Zscaler's Australian public sector team. He's got over 2 decades of expertise in IT and cyber security. And of that, he also has had 5 years in our military as well, where he managed IT and communications in operational environments. Today, Nick is going to talk about the 16-minute breach, why human-led defence fails against Agentic AI. So please welcome Nick.
Thanks, sir. And thank you all. I actually want to start by thanking you for the opportunity to come and talk with my peers. This is a great opportunity and I'm really excited about it, so thank you everybody. And it would be remiss of me to start a presentation without mentioning Sun Tzu. I love a good Sun Tzu quote. I am ex-military, so the idea of offense, defense and the parallels that it plays into the cybersecurity industry are certainly not lost on me, and I'm sure they're not lost on you. I would like to draw your attention to the last sentence there. Not on the chance of his not attacking, but rather on the fact that we have made our position unassailable. Now, unassailable means a couple of things. It can mean that you cannot be attacked, but it can also mean that you cannot be defeated. So I would like to think that there is no cybersecurity, physical or otherwise, system that cannot be attacked, and I reckon that most of you would agree with me there. I would love to be in a position, though, where we can build systems that cannot be defeated. Once again, let's aim for the stars and get to the moon. And that's what I would like to talk today about. I've called it the 16-minute breach, but what I'm calling it a question. It's a statement. Why human-led defense fails against Agentic AI. Thank you for having me. My name is Nick Clark. I'm the principal engineer at Zscaler in Australia. And my objective today is to answer that question, talk to that statement. My key objective, however, is to challenge you. And the reason is I fundamentally believe that the people in this room and the people like you in the rooms here at OzCert are the people that drive our industry forward. And the way we do that is we ask difficult questions. We don't take the yes or the no as the answer. We question each other and we have thoughtful, intelligent discussions. So my objective is to challenge you. And when I say challenge you, when you leave here, if you get to a point where you say, at one end of the spectrum, hey, that Nick guy, way off topic, has no idea what he's talking about. What I think is 1, 2, 3, or 4, and you have that discussion with your colleagues, I'll take that as a win. Other end of that spectrum, if you go, hey, that Nick guy, right on the money, I'd love to buy him a coffee, I'll take that. It's never happened, but I'll take the coffee. Now, how I would like to tackle this today. Why human-led defense fails against Agentic AI. I'm going to cover a few things. Well, I want to start with this 16-minute countdown. And we'll get to where this 16-minute countdown comes from. In the cyberspace, 16 minutes is a pretty short time. So I thought I would start there. Move to the attacker's engine, where I want to unpack some of the activities that have happened this year. Why we've seen an architecture failure. Then I want to move to the escalation. I intended it, when I looked at this presentation way back, it feels like forever ago now and a few months ago, to actually deep dive to there. But quite frankly, a lot's happened since then. So it would be remiss if I don't talk about an escalation that frontier models have provided. Then what we're seeing as machine speed response. And when I talk machine speed response, what I'm ultimately getting to is winning the velocity war. But let's start here, the 16-minute countdown. Why 16 minutes? So every year, and before I go any further, what this is not is a Zscaler presentation. Now I'm using some Zscaler data and information and statistics. So if you hear the words Zscaler, I'm just referring to our ThreatLabz team and the data that I appropriated from them for the purposes of this presentation. So the 16-minute countdown started back in 2025. The ThreatLabz team, the Zscaler ThreatLabz team, pulling data and, more importantly, information from our consulting arm, which does penetration testing and red teaming. And the report's great. There's some awesome statistics in there. The one that I pulled out was this one. Now, Zscaler red teaming exposed critical vulns in 100% of AI systems tested. Okay, it's relatively new. You go back a few years, we weren't doing this sort of thing with AI, not in anger. We kind of expect that. But the median time to the first critical failure was only 16 minutes. This is with people. We're not talking machine speed yet. So we've got consultants, penetration testing, doing red teaming against AI systems, just that one part of the entire digital ecosystem, 16 minutes for a median time. An equally interesting statistic is next to that, 90% of systems were compromised within an hour and a half. So in the cybersecurity space, you would argue that's still a pretty short time. Now, there's going to be a long tail to get to the 100%, and I don't have those statistics on me, sure. But at 90%, an hour and a half, 16 minutes is the number that I'm holding on to, though, for that median time. So what? Well, we're only talking about people. We haven't touched AI yet, and AI from an attacker's perspective. So let's take a look at the attacker's framework. If that's what the good guys can do from a red teaming perspective, what are the attackers doing? And to do that, I want to look at ClawBot as an overview. Arguably not an enterprise tool. I'll have that argument with you. It's not an enterprise tool. It still finds its way into enterprises. And we'll unpack a couple of examples. Now, back in February 1, 2026, ClawBot, with its AI agentic ecosystem on the ClawHub marketplace. Now, those familiar with agents, it's kind of like the early days of containers. People publishing things, not necessarily running the security over what they're publishing. People pulling in skills, agents, MCP services to build out AI applications, and it doesn't have the rigor over it yet. I say yet. So what happened? We saw 300,000 users compromised, and probably more importantly, 1,184 malicious skills that were identified. Now, skill is how we tell an agent what it can do. It's its training. Somewhat intent-based, but that's us telling the agent with its agency and autonomy what it is allowed to do. So if we introduce now compromise that looks like a supply chain compromise, or typo squatting, social engineering, there are a number of other elements to this, we now have software, an agent, acting on our behalf that we believe is doing the right thing, but its intent with its skills, perhaps it's not doing the right thing. So why does that matter? Well, we've now moved to, or from, red teaming with people at 16 minutes down to AI acting with intent. Potentially malicious intent. And the thing I take away from that is not something new. And I don't think it's new to the people in this room either. Assume compromise. If assuming compromise is your starting position, that's probably a good position to take. And I appreciate you're going to balance that from a risk perspective on things that you're not too worried about. I don't need to assume compromise on. But let's assume compromise. So if we're using skills that are malicious, that have been compromised in some sort of way, let's assume compromise and have that as part of our response system design and what we're going to do. Have it as part of our thought decision, our decision-making process on what we're giving this agent access to. Now, it's not new. That same ThreatLabz report that published the 16 minutes as part of red teaming, published the 100% of AI systems compromised. Mate, this was their view on AI and AI as infrastructure. and more importantly, the prediction that came along with it. So it's not a prediction that took long for us to realize. This came out January. In February, we've got a marketplace compromise affecting 300,000 users. We will continue to see more of this. So now we've moved from people speed, 16 minutes. I keep going back to that 16 minutes, down to AI speed. We're looking at machine speed compromise due to things as simple as a malicious skill. Why is that failing us? What I'd like to talk through is Bob peer-to-peer or P2P as a skill that was seen as part of the marketplace compromise. Now, Bob P2P was seen primarily in the finance sector. And what it was absolutely a malicious skill. So something that you include as part of your agentic framework, your agent swarm, you're giving it knowledge on how to do something. What it did was take that, it being compromised, through semantic manipulation, start to manipulate the agents around it. And primarily what Bob P2P looked at were things like the social networking services, agents that were interacting with social services. Now, when I say semantic manipulation, I have an agent in the finance sector, and when I say finance sector, it didn't typically look at the big four banks. We're talking about someone doing financial services, financial advice, stockbrokers, bringing in skills into their agentic framework to help them be more efficient. Great outcomes. That's what you would expect people in that position to use AI for. But now we have this agent potentially running on that user's laptop who is using semantic language to compromise other agents around it, with the goal be a trusted peer. Now, when I look at that, I go, that doesn't necessarily look new to me. Semantic manipulation, trusted peer, it looks and feels a lot like social engineering, but it's just not people doing the social engineering. I mean, if I pulled up a colleague right now and gave them a skill, which was how to do a verbal social engineering attack on another colleague, that's more or less what we're seeing. That colleague would take that skill that I've taught them and go to someone else in the organization and use that to ultimately manipulate them. But why is that different when we put it into a completely digital format? This is where we talk about architecture. Now, whilst you're reading through that, I'll draw your attention to a couple of things. I've got a couple of columns talked about legacy. Even I'll go as far to talk about a perimeter mentality. Quite frankly, I think that's definitely legacy, but it highlights the point, versus the agentic view. If we look at a defense focus, now a defense in a legacy or a perimeter view means a lot. There's a lot of technologies involved to have defense in depth. But and we're all probably guilty of it at some point, talk about the edge. Typically the edge at a branch, a data center, a main corporate office would be firewalls or an SD-WAN edge, some sort of packet inspection edge. The agentic view though, if we're looking to control what has occurred with Bob peer-to-peer as an example, what we're interested in is the interaction. What we're interested in is that semantic language from agent to agent and what the intent of that interaction was. Now, as far as Bob P2P goes, a lot of that traffic, probably case dependent, never even left the server. There's no edge involved. Probably didn't leave your web gateway, your IPSs, your myriad of other technologies that we have in place for defense in depth. We are talking about the interaction. Now, if I combine that with the vulnerability example here, in a typical environment, vulnerabilities, we go to code vulnerabilities, great example, right? We get CVEs published where there is a bug or a piece of software that is vulnerable in a particular way. Use remote code execution is a great example. So if we're going to move laterally between endpoints, we're looking at either increased privileges, we're looking at all these things that we're familiar with. In the agentic space, we used semantic manipulation. This is an intent of language, much like social engineering for agent to manipulate another agent in order to gain trust. They're different. And this is where the legacy architecture fails us. Now, I intended to go into that in depth, but I've changed tact a little bit because there's a lot that's happened and it's escalated. When I say escalation, what have we seen? Well, realistically, it's the frontier models, but I've focused on Mythos. When Mythos was announced back in April, not released, but announced, Mythos came with a whole lot of fear and hype. Is it warranted? Perhaps. That's a discussion that I hope you take back with you to your colleagues. Now, for my perspective, Mythos, I looked at some of the documentation from ASD. Great documentation that talked about the identification at machine speed of vulnerabilities, the ability to build proof of concept exploit code at machine speed, the ability to chain those exploits together against chains of vulnerabilities in order to compromise an end machine at machine speed. Now, if you've read the response from ASD, arguably it's not too good at doing complex chaining yet. But if you have to suffix a sentence with yet, that generally means it's coming and we should still be prepared for it. That doesn't mean Mythos can't do it. Now, I go back to the people in this room and why I want to challenge you. The people in this room, it's up to us, I believe, to cut through that fear and hype, the noise. We don't want noise in our sims, we don't want noise in our socks, we don't need noise in our daily lives of things that we don't need to focus on. One of the things I took away to help cut through that noise, I called the collapse of the patch window. If you can identify a vulnerability, build exploit code at machine speed and deploy that, however noisy that might be in your environment, I see that as a collapse of the patch window in a couple of ways. Now, I've worked in vulnerability management. It's hard at the best of times. We've built this idea of a patch window, and I relate it to the concept that an attacker has to be right once, but we have to be right every time. And if we put that concept into the patching world and services, we have to be right with our services and our uptime every time. It's translated into the way we handle patching. I'll have a look at that patch first. I'll just check that that patch works in a small group. I'll then pilot that patch. I'll then wait until the change freeze is finished and I've got a window on a Saturday night somewhere in the middle of winter that we all have to be sitting there on call for in order to deploy the patch. And 3 months later, we might have our patch in place because the uptime of services has been the critical factor. That patch window has collapsed. So we've now gone from 16 minutes with users being able to compromise AI down to particularly external attack surface. Our patch window has just gone. It's almost, I'll suffix this with yet again, it's almost the commoditization of a zero-day exploit. Not yet, it's almost. So what was the response? The Cloud Security Alliance put out a response on, particularly for Mythos, but it applies to the frontier models. And the response was 11 priority actions. Now this was a start to cut through the noise, which was fantastic. And if you haven't read that, I certainly urge you to read that. They're about actual things you can do in your environments to start to mitigate and prepare for the commercialization of Mythos and other frontier models. There was even timings around it. Do this in the next 30 days, the 90 days, etc. Like, I'm sure we see this every day. There's always timings and urgencies around it, but the 11 priority actions. The next step I did personally was to look through those 11 and go, well, I'm going to logically group them. How do I make those into something that I can easily digest, call that categories, things that we should be looking at. And number one for me was reduce external attack surface. I said reduce, not remove, because I just don't think you can remove your attack surface, depending on how you define it. If you have email, for example, and you communicate with anyone outside of your organization, technically, I would say that forms part of your external attack surface. Users' email can be compromised, and you have business email compromised, etc. But reducing external attack surface by removing IPs, listeners from legacy services, etc. Reduce where possible. When we put this in the context of Mythos and frontier models, this is predominantly at this point coming from the public space. Number 2, zero trust principles. They kind of go hand in hand. If you're developing a true zero trust framework, then by the nature of zero trust, you're probably reducing your external attack surface anyway. Probably. Now, zero trust principles is not just for your internet access, your public applications, your private applications. It's zero trust everywhere. We started with AI, and it should extend to AI. We looked at the semantic manipulation, but agent-to-agent communication. Zero trust principles are to broker communications, and that's a great example of why we would want to broker communications even down to the level of agent-to-agent comms. But it extends everywhere. If you've got IoT devices sitting on SIM cards, broker those comms. If you've got a SCADA network delivering OT, broker those comms. Zero trust principles everywhere. The third one I took away was deception. Deception everywhere. Now, deception for me has always been priority number 300 on people's lists. Back 20 years ago, building virtual machines or machines 20 years ago that sat on an old laptop in the corner of a room over there with cobwebs on them because it was interesting and it was a weird hobby. If we assume compromise and we have machine speed in our environment to drive that compromise laterally, we need things that can help us respond. Going back to the ASD response to Mythos and the frontier models, which I said, they're not there with complex chaining of exploits yet. The yet kind of means they may be in your environment, but they'll be noisy. They don't have the elegance of a real threat actor. I don't like to use the word elegance necessarily for someone who's trying to get into our environment, but I'm sure we can all appreciate the elegance of finding a way into an environment and staying there for the length of time that a threat actor can stay there. AI doesn't have that elegance yet, and we should be looking for the smash and grab, the scanning, the creation of these vulnerabilities at machine speed to create high fidelity indicators of compromise. So therefore, not priority number 300, that needs to come up. That needs to come well and truly up our list of priorities of things that we should be looking at. And as part of that, as a flow-on, automate everything. Easy to say, tough to do. I get that. Why automate everything? Well, if we go back to the previous point about deception everywhere, if we have high fidelity indicator of compromise signals, we can move at machine speed against the machines. But it needs to be obviously measured against the risk of what it is that we're responding to with containment and automation. But we need the right signals in order to do so. So, how do we win the velocity war? Why human-led defense fails against agentic AI? I'm coming back to this question that started it all. And we took a little bit of a journey. We started with 16 minutes, and that was my catch cry of 16 minutes. The ability of a pen tester, red teaming in an environment, an actual human being on a keyboard, taking a median time of 16 minutes to compromise AI. Now AI, once again, it's only a small footprint as part of your global or your larger digital footprint. But we all look at lateral movement. If we can start there, we can get into the rest of the environment as well, right? 16 minutes. We saw that come down significantly with the way attackers are using AI to move at machine speed. And the ClawBot marketplace compromise is a great example of that. Taking a compromised or a malicious skill to get an agent to behave in a certain way that when you look at the instructions given to that agent, doesn't necessarily look like it's doing anything malicious, but we are looking at intent and now semantic manipulation between elements within an AI infrastructure and AI application. Mythos escalated that real quick, particularly for our external attack surface. The Cloud Security Alliance, the CSA, responded, great 11 priority actions, put into 4 categories. So what? How do we, or why human-led defense fails against agentic AI? The problem with this question, statement question, is it infers blame. And as I said at the beginning, I really want to challenge each and every one of you to have a discussion around what your thoughts are about what you can do in your environment when you leave here, or recommend to your peers. That infers a little bit of blame. And the human-led bit, I don't like the human bit either, because we've got exceptionally smart people working there as hard as they can every single day in SOCs, day and night. I don't think it's a human problem. So I'm going to say, is that the wrong question to ask? Maybe not the wrong question to ask, but I want to change the question. Let's change the question. How do we enable a machine speed response? And I think it comes down to a couple of things. And I'm going to bring them both up because I think they're intertwined. We can't look at one independently of the second. The first one being system design and changing our priorities. When I say system design, I go back to the CSA's 11 priority actions, the basics, and I combine that with ASD's documentation, modern defensible architecture. A modern defensible architecture has a few pillars at its foundation. One is zero trust, one is secure by design. It's a great place to start. But if we combine that with the 11 actions that came out from CSA, we go back to reduce your external attack surface. That's a system design input to system design. Zero trust everywhere. That is an input to system design. Deception. This is a change in priority. As I said, I believe we've all probably looked at deception at some point, but it's been priority 300 and you've got too much work to do to even get to that, even if it is considered a weird hobby and some of you are interested in it. I'll put my hand up for that. I've done that many a time. I believe it needs to be much higher on our priority list and a significant driver as part of system design. And automation, automate everything. We can't automate everything if we don't have the right signals. This comes back to system design. We as an industry for a long time have done things piecemeal, not on purpose, but we'll have a contract for a tool that comes up. We go and look at that tool in isolation. That tool in isolation may do what it does in isolation really well, but does it give the signals that the SOC needs? Does it give the information and the reporting to the other business unit? If I blow system design out to some of the work I did in a military systems integrator when I left the military. Doesn't matter what the company was. They built everything from tanks to ships, warships. And to build a complex thing like a warship, you need fantastic system design. And things that MSIs do really well is systems engineering. They take a system design, they take that architecture, they break the system into subsystems, that subsystem into smaller subsystems to make sure that the engineer at the end of that tiny little requirement builds the right thing that interfaces with all of the other subsystems correctly and delivers the right output for all of those other subsystems correctly. So at the end of the day, you end up with the warship and not the tugboat. It's vitally important. We are getting to a point where our systems are getting more and more complex, and it keeps coming back to system design. Our inputs, our fundamentals of zero trust, our inputs from things like reduce external attack surface, automate deception as a change in priority. And finally, the change in priorities. Piecemeal system design has left us sometimes wanting with the information that we need, whether that be logs, alerts, etc. If we don't have the right information, you can have the most expensive saw orchestration, automation framework in your SOC known to mankind, if it doesn't have the trigger, it's not going to respond, particularly at machine speed. It's going to perhaps be a great log aggregator at some point, somewhere in there, and potentially add more noise, but we don't need more noise. We need the right signal to trigger the right response at the right time. So system and design change in priorities are kind of joined together, that you can't do one without the other, particularly when you're changing scope. So I go back to the beginning. Why does human-led fail? I think it's the wrong question. And I certainly don't like the concept of human being in that question. How do we enable machine speed response? We cut through the noise. We go back to basic principles. System design with zero trust, removing our external attack surface and making sure we integrate across a larger system with an enterprise architecture. Now I'll add one more to that. That's for us in the room, but I think that extends further. So this is a side note, caveat. I think that extends further, right? It's not just a technical problem. It should extend into business continuity planning, disaster recovery planning, the contract that's about to be signed for the managed SOC, and understanding who has the communication rights, the legal rights, the response, under what circumstances in that contract. It all forms part of the system design that enables us to be able to respond at machine speed. I'm bang on 2 o'clock. So with that, I would like to say thank you. My objective is to challenge your thought process on this though, right? So I want you to think about it. I want you to leave here with an opinion. I will be at the Zscaler stand for the next day and a half or so. Come by. Ask me a question. Challenge me. I'm happy to be wrong. Bring your particular enterprise context and perspective, and let's have a discussion. Keep it respectful, but let's have a discussion. I want to know more. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Nick. It was a really inspiring talk. A lot of great ideas there, especially deception. I love your inspiring Zscaler shoes. I just noticed
Love it,
them.
yeah.
It's like you're on wings in the cloud. There was actually meant to be a prize for you, like a gift, and I forgot to bring it in the room, but I'll get it for you later on. If we have a coffee, maybe. So yeah, thanks again, Nick.
Thank you. Thanks, team.